this is the bottom 25 albums of the year. Basically, the top 25 worst albums of the year is probably a better title. I've recorded this the same day as the best, so I'm a little bit tired, especially since I'm still sick recording these. But that's fine. By the time they're up, I should be as good to go. But yep, here's another big video. So before we get into the bottom 25 albums, I'm going to read my dishonorable mentions. I've got 5 that didn't make the top 25, but they were close. And I feel like I'm going to keep doing top 25 because I don't think I'm going to review like 500 albums a year. I'm going to probably hit maximum. I think I reviewed just over like 100, so at least I'm kind of picking between a good chunk of them, but not a huge amount at the same time. But let's get the dishonorable mentions out the way. 100 Reasons, Glorious Sunset, In This Moment, God Mode, Throw the Fight, Strange World, Fivefold, Fill in the Blank, and Circa Waves, Never Going Under. Now that we got that out of the way, let's go into the top 25 worst albums. So I started this list off with a more recent album. I've talked about Filters. Algorithm is just terrible. The vocal performance is pretty weak. The mixing just sounds so off. It's just kind of a clunky mess of ideas that would work, but I think the execution just is quite poor. It's an album that had potential, as I do quite like industrial and seeing how they utilize it, but this is a bad mix, and normally industrial bands can kind of get away with it, but this just sounds awful, that the guitars or the vocals just drown each other out. It's not fun. It's not a good album. 24, Guided by Voices, Welsh, Paul Frillies, the only Guided by Voices album that's made it on any of these lists. I don't really care for the band, and I found this one just to be the weakest of the 3. Yeah, if you release like so many albums a year, the fact that I mentioned they've released so many albums since 2020 is absurd. I don't know where they just get the time to write this. I know COVID maybe, but they just write so many bloody albums, it just kind of feels repetitive, and that's how I feel. Just listen to these 3 albums, it's just repetitiveness, and I found this one to be the weakest of the repeated one. 23, we have Suasion, The Infinite. Suasion's a small band I've been following since they followed me on my Instagram and then unfollowed me just so I could follow them. You know, cheap band tactics. But yeah, I found this one to be pretty dull, to be honest. The previous record was quite good, and I found this disappointing. I feel like the mixing was the biggest problem, but even then the songwriting just wasn't really good either. It just felt like bare bone, just very bland electronical, to be honest. I didn't really have much else to say than that. White Reaper, Asking for a Ride at 22. This one's not too bad. I think the problem why I didn't enjoy it enough for it to be in the bottom 25 is that it doesn't do anything to change the formula. If they did just different things on this album, I'd like it, but it takes a good idea and just does the same thing again. There's only one song that stood out to me, and I don't even care that much about it either, which is Pages. Other than that, I just found this one to be pretty boring, to be honest. It's kind of a bit of a bummer, to be frank. 21, we have Dope, Blood Money Part 0. This is basically how I'd interpret it. It's Five Finger Death Punch writing if they were industrial. That's pretty much how I say it. Normally with industrial metal bands like Static X, you're not expecting like the most intriguing lyrics, but you're expecting just some instrumentation that just gives you just some buzz, and that's kind of how I feel with this, and Dope doesn't really do that, to be honest. The instrumentation is fine on some songs, but for the most part I just find it to be pretty forgettable, and when it isn't, the lyrics is just so bad. I just think this is literally the stuff that Ivan Moody would write. Not good, to be honest. Number 20, we have Newfound Glory, Make the Most of It. When you're mostly known for being an emo band, going acoustic rock is a weird change, and gotta be honest, I just found it pretty boring. I know I've said that a lot, but this is a very boring approach. I don't think it works, and the execution just isn't really it. I think there's a idea they had, but it kind of got lost. I don't know what this was. It just wasn't a fun listen. I felt like you kind of had to just sit through it and kind of tell yourself you liked it to really like this one, because I just don't see any appeal to it. Number 19, Otherwise, Godzillionaire. I found this one pretty bare bone. It just feels like some of the most mainstream, bland hard rock I've heard. I've never really been a big fan of Otherwise, and yeah, this is exactly how I feel. It's not good in my opinion. Pretty weak. Number 18, we have DMA's How Many Dreams. I'm not really big on dance rock, so I guess I was a little bit biased for reviewing this, but the amount of times I heard DMA's, I had to listen to this because it was all over the radio station I was listening to, and yeah, it just didn't really do it for me. There's some good songs, but the overall aesthetic I found to be really lacking. I couldn't really vibe with this one. Number 17, Pop Evil Skeletons. I was liking this record, and then you kind of get to the middle and see the problems. It just feels very weak. The songwriting just kind of just goes downhill. It's just got some really weird ideas they want to follow, some elements that just feel so inspired, just a bunch of stuff that just feels so bland for the band. I've never been a huge Pop Evil fan, to be fair, but they had some pretty good songs at the start. Towards the end, when you have the feature artist, that does make up for it, but the middle bit is just a huge train wreck that it makes the whole album just really bland, boring in my opinion. It's honestly more disappointing than it is bad. Number 16, Greta Van Fleet, Starcatcher. Yeah, I've already mentioned this one in my latest video, or at least the albums I missed as well, but did not like this one. I think the production is just weird, and even the songwriting is just pretty boring. I don't really find anything on this one to be particularly interesting. When it comes to the guitars, which always were the highlight for me, there are some good moments, but yeah, couldn't do it. I couldn't really find anything that was convincing enough to pull me back into the record. It's just not fun, to be honest. Fall Out Boy, So Much for Stardust, takes number 15. I liked what they had planned with this one when it came to some of the songs. I think the singles were good. I feel like there's a few decent songs here and there, and as a whole, it's probably one of Fall Out Boy's better records, but that's not saying much. It's still pretty weak. So Much for Stardust, just, I don't know what they had planned for this one when they had an Elton John inspired song, then they had some other influences as well. I'm very surprised they even had Ethan Hawke, or at least like a snippet of something that Ethan Hawke said, I think it was in a movie, put onto this as an interlude. It's a very weird album, but at least compared to Mania, this is so much better. Mania would be much higher on this list. Number 14, we have We Are Scientists, Lobes. I don't even know why I reviewed this. I never really liked the band to begin with, but because of their indie sound, it just wasn't really for me, and I personally felt while they had some good ideas, and I liked like kind of like flavour that some of the earlier albums brought, this sounds nothing like the same band. You're literally listening to something completely different. It's more synth, electronic dance rock based, and it does work. I think this is a good direction for them to pursue, but it's just a completely different band. I'd rather be its own project, and even then I think the execution for most of the songs were just pretty jarring and boring. I don't know, I couldn't really get into this one. I wish I did because it had some promising ideas, but it's pretty disappointing. Number 13, Red Light King, In Our Blood. Other than some songs that just stood out to me, I just find the funk on this just to be pretty lousy. I mean, one of the most notable songs on this one is Cold Killer, which even the refrain is just pretty crap, to be honest. Yeah, I don't really know. Red Light King have just never really been exciting, or at least doing anything that has fully enticed me, but yeah, not this. This is probably their weakest album from what I've listened to. Number 12, Theory of a Dead Man, Dinosaur. The band has experimented a bit, and when I mentioned that they haven't, yeah, I kind of went back into it, and I might take back some of the things I said, but still, it just feels like they're going for just this radio rock, mainstream, directionless approach. And honestly, I think I'd rather take their older stuff than Dinosaur. Dinosaur still, to me, is just a very lackluster album. There's nothing to gain from this one at all, in my opinion. Number 11, we have the Lathams from Nothing to a Little Bit More. Yeah, I just found this one boring. That's kind of it. I can see people liking it, but it's so boring. I've never really been a fan of this indie folk direction this band's always taken. But if you like it, you like it. I can kind of see this one. I put this one high on the list though. I already talked about it. I can't go back on it now, so it's on the list. And there we are. Number 10, we have Pierce the Veil, The Jaws of Life. I really wish there was more grunge because I just cannot stand this band. And post-hardcore being in the same sentence, it's not for me. The Past Nirvana sound is one of the best songs they've released, and I kind of wish they brought more of that, because when there is grunge elements in some of the other tracks, it works, but I wish the whole album had that. It just feels so boring. It just feels like another Pierce the Veil album. Just some of it has grunge elements. Big whoop. Just make, if you want to kind of push more of the grunge, I wish the grunge was the selling point. You're making grunge sound like the selling point, but only having it in like one song doesn't do that. It's very weird. I kind of wish we had more grunge on it, which is odd because I never really asked that for a band. Number 9, we have Atreyu, The Beautiful Dark of Life. The main reason I re-recorded this because I recently reviewed this, and it's terrible. I did not like this one, to be honest. It's a pretty weak album. It doesn't have any of the classic sound Atreyu's brought to their discography. It just pushes out some of the more generic octane core music that we hear. When it comes to Asking Alexandria doing the same thing, at least Asking Alexandria still have their sound put there, because I've never envisioned them to be like the heaviest band ever, especially since the black kind of shows you that what the band would be like if they were heavier, but they've always been more of a post-hardcore blend with alt metal to it, whereas this is a band that kind of built up from metalcore, so the fact that kind of going this way is pretty bad in my opinion. I did not like this album. This was worse than Baptized. Number 8, we have Taproot Scissors. This is just, I don't even know what I was going into thinking this had potential. Taproot releasing a new album. I quite like the one I listened to, Poem. I thought that was a good album, but this is just terrible. But then again, a lot of new metal bands kind of try and do the same thing and similar shticks, or just at least try and do something that's so outrageous that you kind of hear it. I find a lot of the songs to be rinse repeat bland in the samples. Still bother me to this day. Pretty weak at record. Number 7, we have Godsmack, Lighting Up the Sky. The band where the lead singer thinks it's Alice in Chains and even named themselves after an Alice in Chains track. Godsmack. Yeah, I never really understood the appeal to this. It's a band that got big when I feel like they had a few ideas that worked, but when they really started pushing just for that Alice in Chains sound, I couldn't get it. But now the band is doing prog rock, so it's all good, right? This is terrible. I'm sorry. Their final album is a terrible letdown. This is not a good album finale, but I never really expected that from the band either. It's a very weak record. That's kind of where I'm going to leave it for the band. Number 6, Plain White Tees. Plain White Tees. Yeah, what a terrible self-titled. I think the band is trying to redo their sound, but in probably like the most processed, over-saturated record I can think of. One track in and I already hated it. It's not something that I could get into. I don't understand how this is the same band that did the huge hit Hey There Delilah, but I feel like they're going to just be known as that one-hit wonder band that did Hey There Delilah. I think that's kind of where they're settled for now. And then we're in the top 5. This is even worse than the stuff in the top 10. But let's start off with number 5, Story of the Year, Tear Me to Pieces. I'm sorry if you like this one. I couldn't get into this one. I pretty much just gave it a lot of dislike when I did the albums of the month. I think it was in March, or no, February albums of the month. And Tear Me to Pieces was just terrible. I feel like the lead singer's vocals is just really annoying, and it's interesting to put this pop punk band is playing way more with post-hardcore elements, which is kind of cool, but then you get tracks like 2005 which just feel so out of place from the record, and they're just pretty boring. I don't know what they were thinking. That song sucks. And a bunch of other songs with just terrible effects to ruin the song even more. And even one song that's just Neckbeard the song, or no, sorry, Nice Guy the song. We can't confuse the Neckbeards and the Nice Guys. Terrible album, in my opinion. Number 4, The Hoosiers' Confidence. I like The Trick to Life, and I kind of fell off with the band since. And going back into probably my first album in a long time from the Hoosiers, it's pretty weak. I don't know what the band's been doing, but they've been following a very strict pop rock approach. Like, probably say there's almost no rock. I don't even know why I even labeled it pop rock. It's just a pop album. It's not fun. It really sucks is what the band's been going for, especially since it's not really helping them, to be honest. I know pop is kind of something that a lot of people strive for, but if you want to build your legacy, you want to try and redefine your sound. This is not really their sound. More so, they're just watering down what their earlier stuff was, and it's a big shame, to be honest. Number 3, we have Måneskin Rush, a really weak record. There's nothing I wanted to go into with this one. The fact that they've released more songs, I'm not reviewing them. I will never review the album again or talk about it unless I review Måneskin again. It wasn't good. There's so many problems I have with it. I found so much of the writing to be bare bone. It just feels like they just threw a shitload of songs on there. Just thought, let's just do any zany wacky idea, and the only stuff that appealed to me were the ones that actually felt like they had something to say from their language. When it came to the Italian written tracks, that's where I found the stuff to be a lot better. When it wasn't, it was terrible. I couldn't even get into this one whatsoever, and it's also my first album I ever reviewed, so that's a legacy I'm going to live on. Number 2, this is where it really came down to trying to find the worst album, but I'm staying with this. This is 30 Seconds to Mars. It's the end of the world, but it's a beautiful day. It really isn't. I really did not enjoy this one. I don't understand how this is even the same band. I don't even know if this is even 30 Seconds to Mars at this point, or they just decided, let's just throw a bunch of electronic sounds and put a few guitars here and there. Why? This was terrible. There's not a single song on this album that generally feels like Jared Lowe gives a crap anymore. It just feels like the most regurgitated stuff to try and hit the radio point. And I literally can understand some people who kind of prefer this sound to them, but at the same time, when you follow the band also from their earlier stuff, I don't see how this is an evolution. The writing has gotten worse as well. I feel anything they're trying to tell me here is completely thrown off the fact that it's just terrible. Nothing on this really stood out to me. Even my review, I didn't really know what to say. It was just a bad album. It's a 30 Seconds to Mars album that just completely butchers the sound of 30 Seconds to Mars. That's kind of where I can stay with it. And the number 1 worst album of the year, in my opinion, goes to All Time Low, Tell Me I'm Alive. After the first song, I hate it. I don't know how I felt with this one, other than it's the most boring record I've listened to, and when it isn't, it just feels so I don't know why they're doing pop. I have no clue why they wanted to go for the most watered down sound for pop. It just goes from, kind of some little post-hardcore elements in the first track. You got a little bit of that heavier sound of All Time Low. Then every other track just throws that shit away and goes for something that just feels like Maroon 5 on acid. That's pretty much how I can describe it. It's not fun. Even some of the songs feel like Ed Sheeran inspired, and that's not something I think a target your target audience would necessarily go to your rock band for. If you want to go for Ed Sheeran, you just go for Ed Sheeran. If you want to go for All Time Low, you want to go for the sound that they've revitalized. This is not it. This is terrible. And that is my top 25 albums of the year, the worst ones. So hope you guys enjoy. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next video. Merry Christmas.